A Bloomberg journalist by the name of Michael Forsythe has been placed on unpaid leave of absence after he allegedly spoke to the New York Times about how the editor-in-chief at Bloomberg decided to kill two different stories that were critical of the Chinese government. Now, they both had to do with corruption in the Chinese government and how business interests were working with the government on basically corrupting things, very similar to what you see here in the United States. But one thing to keep in mind is it turns out that Bloomberg understandably wants some access to China. They want to make sure that they have employees working there reporting on stories. And at the same time, they have some business interests. So there is a financial services branch that is part of Bloomberg, and they want to make business deals with governmental employees or officials in China. In order to do that, you can't write critical articles. So this has actually been a really big story, and it kind of shows you the problem with access in the establishment media and how far they're willing to go to basically squash stories that might actually mean something to people but piss officials off.
So a couple of things here. It's a real shame because actually Bloomberg News in the past has done some great work.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm no fan of Mike Bloomberg, and I've railed against him many, many times. But Bloomberg News, especially the print side, had done some groundbreaking journalism and reported some things about the American government that a lot of people weren't willing to report, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the reporters here apparently did a terrific job. Michael Forsythe, among others, ferreted out this story. And now Bloomberg's been writing about it in the past, but that's exactly what led to killing this story, it appears.
Yes.
Because since they wrote about the corruption in China, that's when China said, you know what, let's slow down how many Bloomberg terminals we buy. Now you got to understand, that's where they make all their money. Now the journalism side is, I'd be surprised if it was profitable at all, let alone, in terms of the percentage of profits for Bloomberg's company overall. It's all in the selling the terminals, which is related to the financial world, to either banks or, in this case, the Chinese government or different parts of the Chinese government and businesses, right? So all of a sudden they write a critical article and that slows down to a halt. Now, the editor here, Matthew Winkler, as the New York Times explains, for Bloomberg, didn't have a problem. All the editors never had a problem with this story they were working on. It's a news story about how a Chinese billionaire, as Anna was alluding to, is actually giving to the princelings, as they call them, which is the family members of the Chinese government officials.
Yeah.
Right? So now, I told you last week about a story about J.P. Morgan, who had given money to the prime minister's daughter and had given her about $1.8 million. And then she writes back emails saying, I have secured contracts for you that'll involve business worth $5 billion. JP Morgan doesn't get the whole $5 billion, but they get a percentage of that. Right? So this is how the scam is working. Yeah. They're reporting on it, but all of a sudden Bloomberg gets the word, hey, this is hurting our economic interest. Then Winkler turns around and tells his reporters who are doing a great job, yeah, all of a sudden we have issues with it.
Yes. Now, according to one anonymous reporter that spoke to the New York Times, in the call late last month, Mr. Winkler defended his decision, comparing it to the self-censorship by foreign news bureaus trying to preserve their ability to report inside Nazi-era Germany, according to Bloomberg employees familiar with the discussion. So he's basically making the argument that, hey, what reporters did is they basically censored themselves in order to do reporting on Nazi Germany. Because if they didn't, then there would be no availability of the press. But that's obviously an excuse. That's not really the reasons there. There are financial reasons. And I do think that they genuinely do want access to some extent. You do want access to reporting in China.
So yes, there's a kernel of truth there because this is the leverage that all governments use. America uses it all the time. Mm-hmm. You ask questions the American government's not comfortable with, you're not at the front of that White House press corps. I guarantee it. In fact, a journalist from Yemen, Abdul Hayder Sheh, wound up in jail for reporting on American bombs hitting Yemen. They called him a terrorist and put him in jail, okay? So now in China's case, the government will crack down. And for example, with Bloomberg and the New York Times, they stopped giving visas, new visas, so that new reporters couldn't come in. So that's the kernel of truth. But in reality, overall, in this story, they've been working on it for over a year, and they never brought that up before. So all of a sudden, a year into the investigation, when you got the goods on them, and by the way, what they don't tell you is two Bloomberg executives, including Bloomberg himself, are about to go to China and do a visit where they're going to tell them, no, everything's cool, buy more Bloomberg terminals. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, it's Nazi Germany, and we want to remain tight with them and still have access and be able to do more reporting. By the way, if you're not doing real reporting, what good is that access doing you anyway?